And then Philip's going to stand. Yeah, I was hoping Daniel would have I was hoping he would have been down.
First of all, he needs the chairman meeting all mixed up. And he and I both with him today. Yesterday he was we pieced up and specifically. But what's
We've called this press conference together today just to talk or let the members of the press know about Philip Wilkinson on my right. Philip appeared before the Board for Religious Objection yesterday applying for recognition as a religious objection in Category 3, which allows him to do alternative national service with a government department. Philip was refused by the board, and he'll tell you a bit more about the consequences and so on of what his stand is. So maybe I could start off by introducing Philip and letting him go ahead and tell you the facts of the case and what his stand has been and what the possible consequences are.
Morning to you. I submitted this declaration before the Board of Religious Objection yesterday, and this is my basic stand. I'll just read it out to you. I'm a Christian brought up in the beliefs of the Catholic Church. I'm committed to peace and to working for a better future for all South Africans. I abhor all violence and have consciously not used violence myself since my childhood. I've been brought up to respect all people, regardless of their color, sex, religion, or status. I believe that all armies legitimize the use of violence and dehumanize the enemy. The SADF defends apartheid, which in terms of my Christian understanding is heresy. For me to participate in SADF would therefore be a betrayal of all that I know to be good and just. The Bible and the teachings of the Catholic Church call on me to identify with the suffering and the oppressed. As a Christian, I must therefore involve myself in the community around me. I believe there are still ways that I can work peacefully for change, and I must therefore follow the path of non-violence. As Steve said, I went before the Board of Religious Objection yesterday, and I was refused Category 3, where I applied for community service. I was granted Category 1, which says I must be non-combatant in the SADF. I feel that this is of no use to me because, as I've shown my statement very clearly, I cannot partake in any way in the SADF. As a member of the ECC and the UDF in the Eastern Cape, a group called Port Elizabeth Action Committee, I've got a good political understanding of what is going on, and I have gone into townships many times as a civilian, unarmed, met up with a lot of people, gone to a lot of meetings, and I've never met up with any, in fact I've met up with embarrassing friendliness basically. And I feel I just cannot go in there with a brown uniform on, identifying with the oppressor basically. The oppressor who has killed many people in the past few months in the townships. I have got a call up for Sunday, and I have been speaking to my lawyer this morning, and he has made contact with the units in PE. And so far they are making arrangements for deferment. Despite that deferment, I feel that I cannot go into the SADF anyway. So the possible implications of my not going into the SADF are a court trial and going into imprisonment for about 3 years. I feel that if that is what I have to push to, I will do that.
So, General Secretary of the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference, Archbishop George Daniel, the military ordinary of the Catholic Church, was unable to come.
Thank you very much, Steve.
The Church is appalled and saddened by the Board for Religious Objectors decision at refusing Philip Wilkinson alternative community service. He now faces a jail sentence of 2.5 years. South Africa, as you know, is facing a crisis of unprecedented proportions. Despite the increasing anger of the majority of South Africans against the apartheid system, the government remains intransigent and is blindly leading us into a situation of civil war. Philip Wilkinson's general commitment to nonviolence and specific objections to the violence of the SADF must, in the light of this situation, be hailed as heroic. His witness seems only to foster peace and justice, and a stand like his demands the full support and blessing of the Church. When in 1983 amendments to legislation concerning conscientious objection were introduced, the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference condemned them as unjust because they were glaringly inadequate. Our recommendations were and remain based on 3 broad principles. 1, all objectors, moral, ethical, political, and religious, should have their beliefs formally recognized and taken into full cognizance when the type of service they are required to render to the nation is determined. Just war objections should be given equal status to those of religious pacifists. 2, those granted the option of community service should not have to perform a longer period of service than those serving in the SADF. 3, community service should not be confined to work within a government department, but should rather include the options of work within institutions such as the church and private welfare organizations. We chose not to allow a member of the Catholic Church to be co-opted to the board when a Catholic applicant was being heard. We, the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference, remain as committed to these principles as Holdenay's Commission. Without an end to compulsory military conscription, or at the very least, substantial changes to the terms of reference of the Board for Religious Objection, principled and sincere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. I think the importance of Philip's case is the fact that Philip is the first objector who faces the possibility of a jail sentence since 1983 when the legislation was introduced. The legislation being introduced because so many young people did go to jail rather than do military service in the late 70s and early 80s. I'd like to then just introduce David Chandler, the National Secretary of the End Conscription Campaign, to give the position of the End Conscription Campaign on this issue.
Support of the ECC in the stand he is taking. His choosing to become a conscientious objector is a show of immense courage. Philip's case is a reminder to us of the thousands of young white men who are agonizing about being conscripted into the SADF. They're asking the question, and it's a question that we've been asked many times in the advice bureaus, which is a part of one of our member organizations, the Conscientious Objector Support Group. How can we fight and possibly die for apartheid? The answers aren't always easy. At the best of times, it's the most excruciating dilemma. And now, as South Africa enters an ever-deepening crisis, so the crisis facing conscripts intensifies. Philip's option is just one example of what conscripts have resorted to. Others have gone into exile or simply evaded the military by becoming fugitives in their own country. still others enter the SADF against their will. This situation must end. People like Philip should not have to face a term in jail for having the courage of their convictions. Conscription must end. But it might take a long time for the nationalist government to do this. In the meantime, ECC calls for 1. The right to conscientious objection be granted on ethical, moral, political, as well as religious grounds, as is now the case. The length of alternative service be the same as that for military service, not a punitive 1.5 times the length. And thirdly, that alternative service be available in non-governmental organizations.
Thanks, David. I think just to draw your views to do service, I think now what I'll do is open it to the floor for any questions to any of the speakers.
And a large number of those have been granted alternative service. However, figures for people not wanting to serve in the military, for example, those people not turning up for service, have not been given out this year. A question was raised, and he claimed that those figures, when given out last year, were being misused by a certain organization campaigning for an end to national service, as he put it. Obviously, that's a clear reference to ECC. Our feeling is that they're not giving out those figures because they probably jumped. Haven't yet released new figures of people applying to the board. The figure that I gave earlier was one that was given out.
There is an explanation, and it's quite a long one. And my message was, they accepted the point that I was a universal pacifist, but did not accept the point that I was religiously motivated enough. Because in the Catholic Church, we don't have to read the Bible that much. You know, we just go to church and we listen to the priest, and we listen to the readings from the Bible at that church service. It's not forced on us to read the Bible. And I think the perception of the board is that if you don't read the Bible, you're therefore not that much of a Christian. And my witness did try and testify otherwise, but didn't seem to succeed.
Father Steve Wilson is the Catholic.
Would you pick up arms then, or would you go for category 3 as you are now? And I said, no, I would go into the army, but in non-combatant status. Meanwhile, now I'm saying that I don't want to go to the army at all. And that's why I think they gave me category 1. Non-combatant.
What kind of reaction is there towards the objectors in the white community?
Could I say that it's the ECC person to answer that? Okay.
The reaction to objectors in the white community. Often we're very surprised at the kind of response that people who are objecting to military service do get, for having the courage of their convictions. Thank you. Of course, our white community in South Africa is a very conservative one, and to the majority of that constituency, conscientious objectors don't appeal very well. If you go into most white areas, you'll probably be castigated, probably be rejected for refusing to go into the SADF. But there is a growing feeling of support in the white community, from the liberal sectors of the white community, from students, from school children, and from a grouping of conscripts serving in the military, who feel an immense amount of support for conscientious objectors. Often people can't themselves bring themselves to objecting to military service. Often they're forced into exile. But that support is there. People understand the motivation for people objecting to military service. And surprisingly, it is a growing support, and I think we're seeing that through the growth of ECC, not necessarily in that case for conscientious objectors, but for the principle of not being forced to being conscripted into the SADF. There is a growing amount of support for that.
What kind of response?
From the African communities, or people of colour communities, I'll put it that way. In fact, I did get a letter yesterday from the UDF executive, which I would like to maybe read out to you, a couple of sentences. It's dated 27th February 1986, and says, Dear Philip, we in the UDF strongly support the stand that you are taking in refusing to serve in the army of the apartheid regime. We believe that the only genuine road to a peaceful South Africa is through democratic struggle with the majority of South Africans. Your decision to refuse to serve in the apartheid army is a courageous one and an inspiration to all comrades in the UDF. And I think that's quite a good indication, because a lot of people are members of the UDF. Not yet.
The military service is becoming more and more of an issue in our society as the conflict does develop. So I really do think it's an issue that the public needs to be continually informed about. So I'd just like to thank you all for coming here this morning. And if people would like to ask any of the people here questions afterwards, they'd be quite welcome to, I'm sure. Thank you.
Sorry, can I say one thank you as well? I'd also like to thank the Catholic Church for not participating on the Board of Religious Objection and thereby legitimising it. I'm very grateful of that as a Catholic.